Okay, so good morning, good evening, good afternoon to everyone. We are now going to start this MasterClass. I'm Victor Marin. I'm the operations director of CompanyGame. I know that there's people here from many countries. I know there's people from the UK, from India, from Pakistan, también de Colombia, de Argentina, de México, de España. So the language we are going to use is a kind of a mix of English and Spanish, but especially with Nuno during the masterclass, he will talk us in English, and also you have the subtitles if you have problems with the language. That I hope that not. And also I will explain, after Nuno's masterclass, I will explain a little bit the methodology of the challenge. Okay, so how to get access to the simulator, the look and feel of the simulator, how can you navigate through the simulator, and when are the deadlines of each decision run. Okay, so from now I'm going to give the voice to Nuno, so he can start now, and any questions we can talk in the chat, in the chat, and after that we can also open some microphones so you can, you can say some words to us. Okay, so Nuno, it's all yours.
Thank you, Victor. Just to confirm, you can see the screen that I'm sharing.
We can see it, but we cannot see it as a presentation, so you have to exactly.
Can you see it as a presentation now?
Yes, perfect.
Perfect. So thank you very much, Victor, and welcome everyone to this session, which is supposed to be a masterclass of knowledge sharing, best practice sharing. So I'm going to introduce myself, and then I go through the presentation, and then in the end we'll have some time of Q&A, obviously, for you to share your questions and your experience. And then Victor will continue with a more detailed explanation about the simulation aspect of the competition, or the practical side of the reto docente. So my name is Nuno. I'm a board member of the Company Games and Business Simulation Academic Journal, which is an academic journal that I invite you to join and to send your research or anything that you think is worth publishing in this area, as long as it's related to the engagement of students using simulations, not just business simulations, but simulations in general. But of course, our focus is mostly on business simulations. But feel free to search about the journal on Google and to send us something if you would like to share that could be publishable material. I'm also director of technology enhanced learning at Bradford School of Management in the UK, and in that capacity, I'm responsible for overseeing aspects related not only but also related to how to use business simulations for teaching and learning, so to benefit the student experience and the student journey, but also to benefit us as academics in the way that we teach, and to make our experience also more enjoyable. So I'm also assistant professor in entrepreneurship and innovation. That's my area of teaching and research. But I am an enthusiast about simulations particularly, and about technology for teaching and learning. And as we all know, after the pandemic, things have changed fundamentally. And for example, in the UK, we are having a big difficulty to bring students on campus. They just left. They left. So the attendance rate has dropped massively since the pandemic. The universities are not working at 50% capacity, but in some days of the week they are working below 50% capacity, because unfortunately students are just not attending the classes as they used to before the pandemic. So there is a fundamental change in the way that students engage with their learning experience. which doesn't mean that they are not learning or they are not engaging, just means that they're doing it in a different way. And simulations, because it's an online way of teaching, or we can teach with simulations in the classroom, of course, but we can also teach online. They are a very good tool to help us as academics to continue to improve, but also to engage with the students, particularly in those contexts where the attendance is becoming a problem, but not just because of that as well. But going directly to the point, the goal of this session is to share some practices that we have developed at CompanyGame based on obviously the wealth of people that are involved with this area, either as researchers or practitioners, and we tend to obviously bring whenever we have some innovations or some things that we would like to share with other colleagues. It's good to do it because obviously this will benefit the whole community of practice around using simulations for teaching and learning. So I'm going to go basically through the current challenges regarding the use of simulations, and then I'm going to introduce a methodology that we have developed, which is basically reinventing some things that are already available, but we are reinventing the way we use them for the sake of a better experience of the students and of the staff. And needless to say that the goal of having you here also, and thank you before anything else for accepting taking part in this competition, is also to
Es que aquí le puedes poner
is also to help colleagues, to those that are not very familiarized with using simulations for teaching and learning, to become more familiarized with that. Those that have been using simulations for quite a long time, as I know some of you have, it's a way to gain some new insights into maybe some ideas that you probably would like to put into practice. So by no means this session is just for those who have no experience or for those who have lots of experience. This is a session that is aimed at obviously with different levels of knowledge, but it's to engage with all of you who use simulations in one way or another, but who plan to use it more in the future. So we know, and I'm not going to revisit theory around this, we know that simulations are a great tool for teaching, learning, and assessment. They can support effectively the development of the skills that students need to have from the perspective of their employability, because simulations, as you know, they mimic real-world business scenarios and therefore facilitate how students make decisions and how they solve problems, almost as if they were in a real world context. However, we know also that simulations represent still a challenge, and they may be a great tool if they are used in the right way. They may be, or they can become a very bad tool if they are not used properly. And unfortunately, there are many examples that of colleagues that, for one reason or another, have had bad experiences using simulations, and that is usually not just, but usually related to some of these topics that I am highlighting here in front of you. And mostly the most frequent reasons that simulations fail, in the sense of they don't deliver what we expect them to deliver, is of course that sometimes they are used without integration into the broader curriculum or into the broader learning journey of the students. So they are used opportunistically rather than strategically, which is something that we as academics need to address in order to being able to maximize its usage. Also, simulations operate often in isolation from other course materials or disconnected from learning objectives. Simulations lack real-world context. This is a major challenge that we found, and I particularly I speak not only because I also have used simulations from different types of simulations from different vendors, and interestingly, what we see, and this is something that is backed by research, simulations sometimes they lack the real-world context, which means that they don't put the students into the perspective they should be before making decisions. So they don't set the context in which the simulation is supposed to operate, which means that in many cases, what academics do is they explain some theory, they don't connect the theory in total with the simulation, they ask the students to play the simulation, and they expect the students to learn by themselves what they are doing in the simulation, which is obviously not the right way to help them to take the most of this experience. Needless to say that simulations do take time, and obviously time and money, in the sense that there is a learning curve. There is an investment that has to be made, both from staff and students, to make the best use of the simulations. So both us and students have to be deeply involved into the process. It's not just giving them the simulation and expect that they will play and learn something from it. They will not, unless we guide them on how to do it. And this is something that is very important. And obviously, there is another, I would say, challenge related to measuring the performance and learning outcomes in the simulation. How can we link the simulation to an assessment, being it a formative assessment or a summative assessment? But it's difficult, it's challenging, it's not always clear how we can link the performance of the students playing the simulation and the results of the simulation to some sort of an assessment. So this is also a challenge. So these reasons are not exhaustive by all means, but they do illustrate some of the challenges that we face, and particularly most experienced academics that do simulations for a long time, I'm sure they would agree to some extent that some of these challenges are present. Those that are not used, that have not used a lot of simulations, or that are starting to use the simulations, well, this is a good starting point, at least to raise their awareness towards what are the challenges that they will face in one way or another. And obviously the goal of these events is also to share practices and to share experiences with colleagues, so that at least those that have not used them, they can avoid making the mistakes that we did. And I personally speak for myself. I made many mistakes when I started to use simulations about 6-7 years ago, and we want new colleagues to avoid, and we also want colleagues that are more experienced to benefit from this advice. Our methodology, and the methodology that we are presenting here today, is related, or is one way. I'm not saying it's going to solve all the challenges that we have, that I have illustrated. However, participating in this competition is a good way for staff to become more aware and more to train and to practice around how to effectively use a simulation by knowing and by playing in the simulation before anything else. So this is the academic side of this, or the advantage of participating in this initiative. This methodology that I'm going to present to you now is one way to overcoming one of the main challenges that I've just highlighted, related particularly to this lack of context, right? We assume that the simulations are the context. Simulations are a tool. Simulation is a software that basically allows students to make decisions and see the results and make another round of decisions. However, to make decisions, they need to have a context. It's not clear what that context is at all times. Luckily, CompanyGame simulations, they are very good in setting up an initial context for the students, because they do tell them a story. They tell a story about this is what's happening and this is what the simulation is going to be used for. So they understand that there is a narrative that helps them to kind of step into the context in which they will be part of in a virtual world, but still it's better to be part of a virtual context that is there rather than being not part of the context at all. So these simulations from CompanyGame, they're really very good at setting up the context. But these methodologies that I'm going to describe to you are aimed at strengthening how we show the students, or how we put the students into that context. So the challenge is linked to one of the challenges that I said. Obviously, simulations often fail to provide enough real-world context, which can limit students' understanding and application of concepts. And I will go a bit more into detail on this in a bit. And without the context, right, without setting the context in which students are going to play the simulation, they may seem a bit abstract for them from their perspective, and worst case scenario, they seem disconnected from what they have learned. So simulations should somehow complement the theory that we have delivered to the students, in the sense that they will allow them to see in practice how the theory works, right? So we need to set the theoretical context about what we expect them to do in the simulation and link that to the contents that we have delivered. And these contents can be related to marketing, sales, international business, finance, supply chain operations. Of course, different subjects will require simulations with different levels of depth and different, obviously, ways of studying and allowing students to explore that subject expertise depending on their level of studies as well. That's why it's important that we should set the bar on what we want the students to do with the simulation, and choose a simulation that is adjusted to the subject that we are teaching them. Could be, again, marketing, international business, sales, finance, operations, supply chain, and we also need to understand if we want them to develop in-depth knowledge, not only about that subject-related expertise, but if we want them to develop some sort of in-depth knowledge about a specific industry or sector. So we need to identify what do we want them to learn, and based on what we want them to learn, we need to identify what simulations suits better what they should be learning in the simulation. So this is part of broadly what I speak by setting the context in which we are going to use the simulation. So the contextual relevance is important. So it's important and is a solution, one of the solutions that we can use to address this problem. And of course, it's also important to let students understand not only what we expect them to do and to learn in the simulation, but also how the exercise is linked to what they are expected to learn in that module, in that program, in that course. So this has to be clear for them. And it also has to be clear what we expect them to learn from it. And most of all, what skills we expect them to develop in the simulation. So the more objective we are in that way that we explain them before the simulation exercise, the more benefit they will get from the simulation, and potentially the more engaged they will be, and hopefully the better experience they will have, which will, of course, help them to progress in a much better way in their studies, because they clearly understood by using the simulation how the theory applies to practice. And this is obviously one way that we think will work and has been working very well with all the academics that have been using simulations that we have monitored for the last years. So when there is a process in place that sets the bar and also sets the context for what the students are doing with the simulation is a good and a great experience. When there is no context, on where there is poor guidance on what are the expectations and the process, well, then we usually we see that students tend to have a poor experience, and in many cases, colleagues tend to even decide not to continue to use simulations because they had such a bad experience. So that's what we want to avoid, right? We want you to do it the right way, and if you are doing the right way, we want you to share and to potentially do it in an even better way. So we bring here 2 suggestions, and these have been proven by our practice in academia across different universities and working with different colleagues across different universities in Europe, in the Americas, in some of them in Africa and in Asia. One of the approaches that I bring here today is integrating case studies. As you know, case studies are not new, right? I mean, probably most of you, at least if you are in a business school somewhere in the world, you have employed the case study methodology at some point for teaching and for your own learning purposes as well. The good thing about case studies, as you know, and they have been popularized by, obviously, by Harvard, but I mean, I don't know anyone that is in academic that in one way or another has not used case studies for teaching and learning. And we do know that case studies are a good tool in the sense that they do provide a context in which students are asked to make decisions, being that context political context, a business context, a business in distress, a business that needs to grow. And usually these case studies are illustrated or illustrate big brands, big companies, but we also have case studies that illustrate companies that are not so well known, but still are very powerful in the sense that they do deliver a good way for students to understand not only a situation and apply theory into solving that situation, employ that theory into and apply their critical thinking into coming up with a solution. And obviously then in the class, they will discuss the outcomes of what solutions they provided and what were the real outcomes of the case study in the real world. And they are able to see the differences between, okay, this was the initial case, this is what we thought or we would recommend, and these were the actual results, what happened to that company in light of that situation. And they are able to see whether or not they made recommendations that were somehow aligned or not so well aligned with the real outcomes. The case studies have some limitations, of course, because they are not dynamic. They don't allow us to test different alternatives given an initial situation. So let's say that the company is entering a new market. The case study is about all the situation, all the competitors, all the market analysis, and based on that information, the case basically says, now what should you do? In a case study, there is no right or wrong, but usually in the end of the case, there is a solution. And that solution is the description about what the company did, what the real company that originated the case study did. Why simulations are good? Why simulations are good to overcome the limitations of the case studies? Because they allow the students to, given a specific context, to test different approaches to solving that problem or to make different decisions that would be that in the same way that they would do in the real world. In the real business world, as you know, there is not one best solution for all the decisions that we have to make. There are different solutions and different impacts. The simulations will allow them precisely to test different ways of this or different decisions and to see what kind of impacts these decisions will have. So bringing the case study and blending it with simulations allows what we call adaptive learning experience, in the same sense that they can, in the simulation, make decisions as if they were mimicking a real world company, and in the end, compare those decisions with the decisions that were actually made by the real world company in the case study. But more than that, they can rewind back in time and correct the decisions or make decisions that are different from the decisions they made in the first place and see whether or not they would yield considerably better results, even better than those that have been achieved by the real company that is in the case study. So obviously this dynamic will allow them to develop in a much more effective way their critical thinking skills and their sense of understanding of the complexity of the business world. The good thing about the simulations is that they can actually be designed to be adjusted to the cases that we want students to work on. And you will be impressed by how easy it is in most of the simulations. And I particularly speak about CompanyGame simulation, how easy it is to configure specific decision-making scenarios that we want students to start with, right? So there is not one size fits all in the sense that they use simulation A and everyone has to use that specific starting point. No, simulations can be configured and customized to some extent with a minimum effort to allow precisely the academic to create the template or the starting point that we want students to begin with, right? So this is also a sense of the scenario approach or building scenarios in the simulation that can be used to strengthen the narrative around the case study, and also to obviously to create a diversity of settings that students can use to make decisions and to test their knowledge. And needless to say that, of course, this also allows to bring life into the case studies in the sense that they are not just a traditional static 2, 3, 4 pages of information that students have to read and then make a decision and confront that decision with the reality, whatever the reality that is. But they can basically, okay, that is a starting point. Let's see what alternatives we could have decided on and how these different alternatives, albeit in a simulated environment, could have led the company to significantly different performances. So this is also a much better way of using the case study in that sense. The other approach, which is probably nothing new to you, and which was actually developed for us teachers back in the 60s, was the micro-teaching approach. Probably you have heard about it. Micro-teaching is all about us as teachers in dividing the contents in the classrooms, in the modules that we teach, into small chunks of material. And every time that we talk about that we lecture on a small piece of the subject or a small part of the theory, we would apply an exercise so that students could link immediately how that theory applies to the practice. This is pretty much the Bible, I would say, of the teaching, not just in higher education, but since the primary education to secondary education, further education, and higher education. But this is becoming the norm again. The norm is that, and this is also to do with the way that these new generations of students learn, which is significantly different from the way that I have learned when I was at the university, and I would say is probably very different from the way that you have learned as a student. So students do demand, or they don't demand, they don't assimilate a lot of content at the same time nowadays, and we find that that's the reality. They tend to assimilate easily smaller chunks of content, and we need to give them space and time to assimilate that content. So that is why it's linked to micro-teaching. So micro-teaching is all about embedding the philosophy of teaching based on small chunks of content. In a 45-minute or 1-hour session, I cannot expect, or students will not learn the same way if I speak for 45 minutes in a row compared to if I speak for 10 minutes, give them an exercise to apply what I have talked about, and then potentially continue with another 10 minutes and give them another exercise. So in a 45 to 60 minutes lecture, I am expected to deliver 15 minutes of theory, 10 of practice, plus 15 of theory, plus 10 of practice. That's pretty much it, which is, again, a new model of teaching. So at least I speak for the traditional model in the United Kingdom. It's pretty much around seminar tutorial sessions. And we know that this system is no longer fit for purpose for the new generation of students that we are teaching. Students cannot take 1 hour of someone talking to them about the subject because they will only retain the first 10 minutes and hopefully the last 5 minutes. So everything else in between is just like a black hole. They did not capture it. So the micro-teaching, or infusing the micro-teaching approach in our teaching and learning, is becoming relevant again. And this is a part of using simulations or not, because simply we identified that students cannot take too much content in a row without pausing and giving them some time to learn and to practice that knowledge. And this is how simulations blend well with this, I would say, revival of the micro-teaching approach. Why? Because simulations can be programmed, and many simulations are already programmed to be to allow students to make to practice simple exercises. So instead of having to play or to make a very complex set of decisions, some simulations, such as some that CompanyGame, in the CompanyGame's portfolio, they do have the option to give the students the opportunity to apply different or small activities into the simulated practice, see the results, and gradually understand better the subject that we are talking about. For example, a marketing simulation, right? In marketing, we invariably speak about marketing strategies, digital marketing, the the price promotion and placement strategies, positioning, etc., etc. Obviously, we can spend 1 hour teaching students, for example, everything we know about the 4 Ps of the marketing: the price, the promotion, the placement, and the product. Or we can decide, look, let's split this hour into chunks of time, and in each chunk, I will explain the fundamentals, for example, related to pricing decisions. And then I invite them to play a simulation exercise where they can actually make some pricing decisions for a specific product in a very specific context and see that when they change the price, something happens, right? Demand will fluctuate, will go up, will go down. And after they have assimilated that, I can go and explain to them what happens if you make decisions related to placement or distribution channel. So this is how simulations can be very good tool and blend in very well, in the sense that they can provide a dynamic environment for practice, but not practice in the sense that they have a lot of decisions to be concerned with, but practice simple decisions. And by gradually learning about these different aspects, they will understand, master the theory in the first place, and obviously understand the whole scope of the simulation. So this is to say that simulations can be very well suited for high-level students that have already a very broad understanding of a business, how it operates, and for that, a more complex simulation with potentially dozens or even hundreds of decision-making points that they have to go through. But simulation can be equally powerful if you use it in a context of, for example, first-year university students or further education students, when they don't have a mastery of all the aspects of the business decision-making, but they do want to learn about specific aspects of decision-making, and the simulations can be made simplistic enough so that they can only, so that the students will only have to focus on that specific decision. They don't have to consider the whole spectrum of decisions that normally a business involves. So they will provide obviously a much safer ground for activities that they can use related to that. So in this sense, the micro-teaching approach blended with simulations is also a very good way to facilitate our life as an academic, in the sense that we will be more effective in the teaching, but also the students will be hopefully more effective in understanding the concepts. And again, small content, small activity in the simulation, gradually evolving to more complex content and more complex activities in the simulation. What was missing here, and luckily AI has helped to overcome, and CompanyGame is doing it very well in terms of embedding artificial intelligence in the simulation. What was missing was the problem with the feedback loops, right? So for every time that there was a decision that students had to undertake in the simulation, someone would have to assess, someone would have to give them feedback. And AI is facilitating that immensely, because we don't have to be present at all times to give feedback to the students. The artificial intelligence can generate reports and in a very good way give students some feedback to what they have done and what they should have done. So AI in the simulations is actually helping us to close that loop and to make the whole process more fluid and time effective. Because we know that as academics, the main problem that we had until 2 or 3 years ago was, how am I going to give feedback to 100 students that have played this simulation? I used to do it by obviously looking at their individual performance sheets, looking at the KPIs, giving them a written report. I still have to do it when the simulation exercise is linked to, for example, an assessment. But if it's linked to a formative assessment, I don't have to do it anymore. Or I can still do it, but I can have the support of an AI tool, which will greatly improve not just my time, but also the student experience, because they can have that feedback instantly. I can still moderate it, which is what I do, but I can moderate it afterwards to see if the feedback that was provided by the AI is somehow inconsistent or not good or not relevant, or at least not aligned with what I expect it to be. So I can still do that moderation, but at least students don't have to wait for 1 week or 2 weeks until they get their feedback. It's instant, it's automated. This is really good. way of pushing forward the effectiveness of the simulations. Because as you know, students don't want to wait for anything nowadays, right? They are used to this content that they have access to using social media platforms and network, and content for them is something that is volatile, and they want instant reaction to whatever action they cause. And this the same difficulties we're having in academia is how to make this happen, how to make this possible. We cannot multiply ourselves, right? We cannot clone ourselves and be available at all times for students. So the simulations do provide a good way for us to deliver that without necessarily replacing us and our leading role, but supporting us and supporting them in that experience. Practical example before I open the ground for some Q&A, because I'm sure you have some interesting questions, at least challenging questions to make. Let's give you an example. This is just an example of a module around principles of marketing, which is a topic that in one way or another, every business or every business teacher understands at least a bit, right? So I didn't want to bring here something extremely complicated. And let's say that the first topic is about market research, and the micro teaching that I would use to teach that students that about marketing research would be a 10-minute session on the different types of market research. Explain just basically the main differences between qualitative and quantitative data, primary, secondary data analysis. I'm sure that you would say, how can you do that in 10 minutes? Of course, if you're teaching research methods, you need at least 6 or 7 weeks to go through all the detailed research methods related to market research, but in a simplistic way. And this is the purpose of this exercise, is how to make something, transform something that is apparently, well, not as simple into something that can be made simpler by using simulations. So let's say that I would deliver a 10-minute, 15-minute session about the principles of market research. And without going into a lot of depth, I would be able to deploy a simulation activity by giving the students the opportunity to analyze or to conduct a virtual market research in a simulation, which is related, for example, to a company that manufactures mobile phones and is selling them around the world. And in the simulation, students have access to market data in terms of customer preferences and trends. So they have a lot of secondary data that they can use to inform their understanding about the market. So they could be challenged to pursue a simulation activity whereby they would expect to collect data that's available in the simulation to build a picture about the market that they are supposed to understand better. And again, in the same line of thought, I could link this particular to this particular micro teaching. I could link a case study, and I could give them a case study of a company without, I'm not advertising in favor of Starbucks here, but this is just an example. Starbucks, they have a case study about this particular topic. What have they done? And the students could be incentivized to read that case study and potentially to confront the results of what that company did and with what they did in the simulation. Ideally, what we would have is a case study that is totally aligned to the simulation. So if I have a case study that is about the coffee shop business, I would want them to practice that in a simulation that is precisely about managing a coffee shop business. The good thing about CompanyGame simulation is that because they have over 30 simulations, it's very difficult that you don't find a simulation that is aligned with a specific subject or vertical, and you will find that possibility within their portfolio. Let's say that the next session or the next week, I would be teaching the students something about segmentation, targeting, and positioning. Again, the logic of the micro teaching is 10 minutes, give them just a very basic understanding of what these concepts mean, and ask them to learn more about the concepts by reading a case study, which again can be about a global brand or a not so global brand, and practice those contents in the simulations. And again, the simulation activity would be to make a set of decisions, simple decisions around different experimenting, different segmenting and marketing strategies in the context of a simulated business and see what results they would get. And from there, obviously, they would have to come up with their own interpretation and discussion on what was that they thought was good or what results were not so good. But as you can see, this approach, blending these two instruments, case studies, micro teaching, or three instruments, case studies, micro teaching, and simulations, consistently helps them to make sense of the theory in a very practical way. And that's what we advocate for. Another example about marketing mix, how to explain them the 4 P's of marketing. Brief introduction, go into the simulation, practice around pricing decisions, and gradually practice around pricing and promotion distribution channels, and gradually learn about different promotional activities. And as they progress in the simulation, and this could be in the course of 1 hour session or 2 weeks, depending on how much depth you want them to gain and how much time you have, of course. But you can practice in the simulation about different decisions, and gradually the simulation opens new levels of difficulty, pretty much as in a standard game, right? The simulation can be looked at that from that perspective. They start with a very basic decision making, and they evolve into more complex decision making. So the simulation will become more complex as the students evolve and master the decision making. And the last example, let's say in these principles of marketing, I would also like to cover digital marketing. And of course, I would set up a session to introduce the concepts of SEO, on-site optimization, off-site optimization, pay-per-click, funnel, all those models around digital marketing. I would ask them to play in the simulation to run a digital marketing campaign where basically they would have to learn and analyze the same KPIs as if they were analyzing for a real business in terms of the conversion, the cost per acquisition, the cost per click, depending on the variables that you would like them to work on. Ultimately, they can, in a simulation, replicate a digital marketing campaign the same way as if they were actually paying Google or Facebook to run ads for that campaign, right? But they do it in a simulated environment, which is cost less for them. They don't have to put real money into making this, into those campaigns, but they can measure the results of those campaigns. And again, they can confront their learning experience in the simulation with a case study that could help them to better make sense of how this has happened or what has happened in the real world. So you may be saying at this time, well, gosh, but this is lots of work. It is lots of work. Yes, indeed. It's a very different approach from the approach that, at least the way I was taught when I was at university. It's considerably more rewarding in the end. You have to go through the process once or maybe twice to get it right. But you'll see that once you get it right and you get all the learning outcomes mapped against them and all the activities sequenced, you will see that it's much easier from an academic perspective to deliver content in this way compared to the traditional old-fashioned way of 60-minute lectures and then tutorials and repetition, and students don't pay attention to us. So this is one way we advocate as benefiting both us as academics and benefiting the students in the sense that they will capture the understanding about things in a much more effective way as they would compared to the traditional way of teaching and learning. So luckily in CompanyGame, they are very well, and the company is very well prepared to help us academics to go through all these stages. And I can witness it by myself in my own practice at Bradford School of Management. We have made a radical transformation in the way that we have used simulations for teaching and learning. And we are actually in that process now, as we speak, of readjusting the way of teaching to have present this philosophy that I have been describing to you, pretty much due to the support of CompanyGame and their expertise in this area, without whom it would not have been possible. So in this spirit, I think that you will have something to learn from taking part in this competition, which hopefully will also challenge the way that you think you will be teaching in the next 10 years of your career, right? So I would invite you to look forward. Doesn't matter what you have done until now or what examples you have followed until now. It's good to have some time to reflect, and the competition is a good way for you to reflect on your own teaching practice and how you would reinvent it if you could, by using not just by using simulations, but also by using simulations, which are a tool for the future. And obviously, if you look at the intersect of simulations and artificial intelligence and how all these technologies can blend together to facilitate our teaching experience, but also the students' engagement and the students' experience, you will see that in the end, hopefully, the outcomes will be very positive for you as academics. And on that note, I would like you to ask me some questions. So it's been, yeah, we still have some time. I think I would leave it to Victor to lead it from now, but please, by all means, if you ask some questions or type them in the chat, I think we still have some minutes to respond. Victor, what do you think?
Yes, for sure. If someone wants to open the microphone and make some questions to Nuno, I think we have at least 5 to 10 minutes, because after that I will explain about the methodology of the teacher's challenge. Okay, but before that, if there's any questions, I think could be interesting to ask it to Nuno if someone have it.
Or if you disagree, you don't have to agree with what I said. By no means, feel free to disagree. And well, I'm happy to take on whatever you have to say about this this session. Please, by all means. Hernan is asking Victor if the simulador está en línea. I would assume
the simulator is
online.
completely online, 100% online. So you don't need to install anything in your computer.
I'm sure there will be some questions. We will be here until the end of the session, so feel free to just message them. And Victor, perhaps it's time for you to continue and to lead into the presentation of what's going to happen next. Thank you.
Okay, so if you don't mind, just also to know that we have many people from America. I will change my language to Spanish, but the ones that
okay, perfect.
I think that you have subtitles, so you can read everything in I'm speaking in your language. So here in the above bar of Zoom, you can activate subtitles and also the language in which one you want to read the subtitles. Okay. Now I'm just going to change my language, but I will still have enabled the subtitles in English. Muy bien, pues como les decía, antes de empezar a ver cuáles serán todos los, digamos, todo el proceso del reto docente, lo que voy a mostrarles es la línea en la que estamos trabajando respecto a la inteligencia artificial, como Nuno ha avanzado, que era un área en la que estábamos trabajando, y lo estamos haciendo sobre todo en varios campos, ¿no? Pero específicamente en dos de ellos. ¿Vale? Entonces voy a mostrarles y después pasamos al área. Lo que les voy a mostrar ahora es una plataforma en la que estamos empezando a volcar, digamos, tanto tener la capacidad que pongamos contenido en ella, ¿vale? Podamos crear cursos, actividades, todo un seguido, ¿no? En la que obtienen puntos, y además de ello encontramos los simuladores, ¿vale? Por lo tanto, una plataforma en la que está completo todo el área. Y, por ejemplo, pues yo voy a presentarles mi avatar. Sí, como van a ver, las palabras que van a ver ahora no son palabras que he dicho yo. Además, creo que están en inglés y verán que el acento no es el mismo. Pero bueno, creo que hemos de empezar a pensar si ya dentro de estos cursos, que en la mayoría ya empiezan a ser híbridos, en el sentido de, como decían uno, ya mucho del tiempo, sobre todo después de la pandemia, hay alumnos que ya no vienen a clase porque saben que tienen contenido online y estamos trabajando, ¿no? En ese ámbito híbrido. Pues bueno, imagínense cada profesor que tenga su propio avatar. ¿Vale? Welcome to the module, Principles of Responsible Management and Practice. We are glad that you are motivated by the fascinating world of sustainable business. In this module, we are going to propose you carry out a wide variety of activities, which will allow you to learn through practice and experience. ¿Vale? Este es un ejemplo de algo en que estamos empezando ya a trabajar, ya está funcionando, y cada vez vamos a poder a poder tener más contenido de este tipo, ¿no? Y apoyarles a ustedes en que cada uno de ustedes pueda tener su propio avatar dentro de la plataforma de CompanyGame. Y por otro lado, en lo que estamos trabajando es en apoyarles a ustedes, ¿no? Como decían uno, es que podemos tener clases de 100 alumnos y cómo les damos el feedback de una simulación de 100 alumnos, ¿no? Teniendo que analizar todo, pues lo que hemos estado trabajando es todo un sistema que por sí solo, después de una simulación, ¿no? Como puede ser esta en el simulador Energy, en la que recibe los datos que ha habido después de un ejercicio de simulación, ¿vale? De todos los equipos que han llevado a cabo la simulación, nosotros esto lo volcamos en nuestro sistema de inteligencia artificial y devuelve un reporte en el que tenemos un pequeño resumen de cada uno de los equipos, es decir, de cada una de las empresas, ¿sí? Y posteriormente, si queremos, también tenemos más detallado con consejos y lo que le ha pasado en las diferentes áreas de cada una de las empresas, ¿vale? Por lo tanto, es una manera que la inteligencia artificial apoya al profesor en los procesos de reporting y análisis, ¿vale? Por lo tanto, estamos trabajando. Esa misma tecnología se puede utilizar para el uso con los estudiantes, ¿de acuerdo? Sin embargo, creemos que es algo que tenemos que hacer conjuntamente con la institución para planificar de qué forma queremos incorporar estos sistemas de inteligencia artificial que estén, digamos, accesibles para los alumnos, ¿vale? Por lo tanto, por el momento en lo que estamos trabajando ya y que estamos incorporando en la plataforma docente para los simuladores es todo lo que está relacionado con el apoyo en el proceso de análisis de resultados de la simulación para el profesor, ¿vale? Por eso estamos aquí presentándoles a ustedes en este ámbito del reto docente. Muy bien, si no tienen ninguna duda, por el momento vamos a pasar un poco a explicar cómo vamos a desarrollar este reto docente, esta competición, ¿no? También vamos a darle un punto de competitividad en este proceso. Y pues bien, primeramente, un poco presentarles el reto docente. El simulador que vamos a estar utilizando, como ya les enviamos en la convocatoria, es el simulador Food Company. Es un simulador de un nivel, diríamos, intermedio, con una visión muy general de lo que es una empresa. ¿Vale? El motivo es porque entiendo que todos vamos saturados de trabajo, entonces tampoco queríamos a ustedes ponerles con el simulador más complejo que tenemos, porque entonces a ustedes les requeriría mucho tiempo y hemos pensado que un simulador de un nivel intermedio en el que ustedes puedan ver y trabajar con él, pues tener esa experiencia, pues creo que también nos viene muy bien. ¿Vale? Les hemos hecho llegar el manual a través de correo y lo van a tener accesible. Entonces, por el momento lo que les vamos a pedir es que van a ustedes a poder trabajar en equipos. Los equipos no es necesario que sean con miembros de la misma institución, ¿vale? Pero pueden hacerlo. Y si quieren ustedes trabajar en equipos, lo que les pediremos es que nos envíen a este correo, ¿vale? ¿Quiénes son los nombres, los correos y el nombre del equipo que quieren trabajar conjuntamente en el simulador? ¿Vale? Entonces, de esta forma, nosotros a partir del viernes les vamos a estar a todos ustedes, tanto a aquellos que van a trabajar de forma individual como los que quieran trabajar en equipo y nos lo notifiquen, vamos a enviarles las claves de acceso al simulador, ¿vale? Para que puedan empezar ya a trabajar con el simulador propiamente, ¿vale? Vamos a realizar 3 rondas de decisión. ¿Qué quiere decir? Que ustedes van a poder analizar los datos de la empresa, ¿sí? Que van a tener datos de los 2 últimos años de gestión de la empresa y a partir de aquí ustedes van a, ustedes van a tener que tomar decisiones durante 3 rondas de decisión, en la que cada ronda de decisión equivale a un año de gestión de la empresa, ¿vale? Entonces hemos puesto 3 deadlines, ¿sí? El día 13 de junio por la noche, digamos, europea, ¿vale? El día 18 de junio y el día 23 de junio. ¿Sí? Hemos puesto noche europea porque tenemos personas de América, personas de Europa y personas de Asia, ¿vale? Así podemos, creo que también de África, así incluso de Oceanía, ¿vale? Por lo tanto, tenemos todos los continentes ocupados y tratamos pues, de que sea el punto intermedio, ¿vale? Pero por eso ya les estamos dejando 5 días entre cada una de las rondas de decisión. El simulador lo procesaremos por la noche y al día siguiente por la mañana ya tendrán los resultados consecuencia de las decisiones que han tomado. y presentaremos el ranking, ¿vale? El ranking lo vamos a publicar en la página web del reto, ¿vale? Y van ustedes a poder verlo en base al valor de la compañía. Está explicado en el manual cómo se calcula el valor de la compañía. Entonces, lo que voy a hacer a continuación es mostrarles cómo es el simulador. Es decir, una vez nosotros el viernes les demos acceso al simulador, cómo se trabaja con este simulador. Antes, por eso, de mostrarles cómo se trabaja, explicarles un poco de qué trata, ¿no? Bien, el simulador Food Company es lo que simula es la gestión de una empresa en la que se producen 3 productos lácteos: leche, yogur y queso fresco, ¿vale? ¿Qué sucede? Vamos a crear universos de 5 empresas, ¿vale? Es decir, ustedes van a competir. Si yo trabajo individualmente, en mi mercado va a haber 4 empresas que son idénticas a la mía. El ranking sí que va a ser global de todos ustedes en el valor de la compañía, pero de forma directa van a competir contra otras 4 empresas, ¿vale? Y vamos a tratar que sea totalmente multicultural la competencia que haya, ¿vale? Para que sea una experiencia más internacional. Entonces, bueno, esta empresa tiene una parte de producción, una fábrica de producción, en la que ustedes no definen el volumen de materia prima, sino que definen las unidades que quieren ustedes producir. ¿De acuerdo? De esta forma, ya el sistema, en forma automática, adquiere la materia prima que necesita para producir estos productos, ¿vale? En el área del producto van a tener que definir el precio del producto, cuántas gamas de producto quieren ofrecer, todo lo relacionado con la marca, el nivel de packaging y la calidad del producto, así como el proveedor de materia prima. Los productos se comercializan a través de 3 canales de comercialización: lo que sería Horeca o hostelería y restauración, tienda tradicional, pequeña tienda y gran superficie, ¿vale? Y en el mercado nos encontramos 3 segmentos de demandas: niños y jóvenes, adultos y healthy, ¿sí? Cada uno de ellos con unas preferencias diferentes. Y un poco estas son las características así a nivel global de la empresa. Les aconsejamos que lean el manual para saber un poquito más sobre ello. Bien, cuando accedan al simulador, esta es la pantalla que van a encontrar, ¿sí? Donde los dos principales menús son el de Office y Decisions, o despacho y decisiones, ¿vale? Que clicando en ellos se nos va a habilitar el panel de control, donde vamos a ver las diferentes pestañas donde vamos a poder analizar la información. Como les recuerdo, de partida van a tener la información de los 2 últimos años de gestión de la empresa. Y lo que van a poder ver es, por un lado, la evolución de su empresa, pero también el comparativo, en este caso, de los KPIs con los competidores, ¿vale? En este caso, si se fijan, los datos de los competidores son idénticos todos, ¿vale? ¿Por qué? Porque todos en la situación de partida están en la misma situación. Recuerden que en esta parte superior pueden encontrar el nombre de la empresa que se le ha asignado a ustedes en el mercado. A partir de aquí van a poder ir visitando todas las otras pestañas para tener más detalle sobre la situación de partida de la empresa. Los indicadores clave son lo que nutre directamente al valor de la compañía. Por lo tanto, son los valores que queremos mejorar de nuestra empresa, ¿sí? Y para hacerlo tenemos que tomar decisiones. Y para ellos tenemos el menú de decisiones, en el que podemos incorporar los datos, ¿vale? Solamente tengan en cuenta que para los decimales solo necesitan en el área de precios y utilicen la coma para los decimales, y para los miles que pueden encontrar en otras decisiones no usen ni puntos ni comas. Y van a tener que ir visitando todas estas pestañas poniendo los valores para que van a formar parte de la estrategia que ustedes quieren seguir, ¿no? Una vez incorporados los datos en cada una de estas pestañas en las que van a encontrar casillas para incorporar su estrategia, van a tener que guardar sus decisiones y simplemente su trabajo antes del deadline, dejar grabadas sus decisiones, ¿vale? Con eso es suficiente. Y este es el trabajo que vamos a hacer. con el simulador, ¿vale? Estamos por ver si vamos a organizar una nueva gala después de la última decisión en la que anunciemos el ganador final del reto, o lo publicaremos en nuestras redes sociales, pues anunciando cuál es el ganador ya del reto docente, con los premios que hemos visto a través de licencias, microcredenciales, etcétera, ¿vale? Como vienen las bases del reto docente, ¿vale? Por lo tanto, bueno, esta sería la dinámica del reto, ¿vale? So, I don't know if you have any questions. Si tienen alguna pregunta. Eduardo Castillo nos pregunta que los grupos de competición no son homogéneos. El valor de la compañía debe ser por grupo de competición. Es decir, el valor de la compañía es en cada grupo, pero hay un ranking global de todos, digamos, de todos los grupos, de todos los universos que vamos a crear. Un poco en la misma dinámica del reto de los alumnos. Sí, efectivamente se puede participar individualmente o en equipo.
Hello, Victor. Can you hear me?
Yes, for sure.
Yeah. Thank you very much because I was quite busy in reading because I don't know the Spanish things. Well, thank you very much for giving this all of information. I have a couple of questions on that. When is the earliest possible that you will give an access to this? And the second thing is to make our decisions. Like I was involved in another kind of simulation where we give students a key perception factors or indicator that can help them to make decision that, okay, how much you have to put for the marketing efforts or any perception factor that guide them that these are the like the lowest and the upper value that can guide them that, okay, in between you can play around. Is there anything that we can have?
Yeah, here the thing is that you have the information from the last year. In this in this version of the simulator that we have prepared for the challenge, for the teacher's challenge, we have take like the budget, the marketing budget limits. We have take it so you can try to make the very like kind of hard strategies or very different strategies. Okay, so we have taken out the marketing budget limits. Okay, for you, but we can set it for the students when they use it. We can set this limit and give like a kind of a maximum limit of for they can spend in these areas. Okay, and we will send you the access on Friday. Okay, this Friday with your passwords. So once we give it, you can start analyzing all the information. Okay, and saving your decisions before the
13th.
the first deadline that is on the 13th.
All right. And after that, like as you said that on 13th we have to submit and by 14th we will get the results, right?
Exactly.
And on 14th onward, whenever we are ready, we can give input by maximum 18th and same
exactly
as
for the second decision.
All right. Yeah. Thank you very much. Yep.
Okay, thank you very much. I don't know, you have any question, any other question? You can also open the microphone.
Sí, Víctor, yo quiero insistir con algo. Yo fui el que escribí lo de si el ranking es por grupo, pero se valora el general. Es como si, digamos, comparáramos la Liga de España con la Liga Turca o la Liga japonesa. Son competiciones diferentes. ¿Por qué? Porque puede haber mucha más competencia en un grupo que en otro, que hace que el valor de las compañías no suba tanto como en otros donde no hay tanta competencia, entonces un competidor se puede ver favorecido por eso. Yo sé que en esta ya está decidido eso, pero yo sí recomiendo que en futuras ocasiones, porque he visto que es una constante, evaluar es por el ranking general. Eso me parece que de alguna forma, por lo que te acabo de decir, pues no es lo más equilibrado, porque en aquellos grupos donde la competencia es más fuerte, más estrecha, la posibilidad de sacar diferencias significativas en valor de la compañía se reduce, frente a otros donde la competencia, donde hay un competidor claramente superior, que se puede sacar mayor diferencia frente a sus competidores y en el ranking.
no estoy al 100% de acuerdo en eso, en el sentido de que cuando hay más competencia, todo el mercado crece más. Entonces es más difícil destacar en ese mercado, pero como el mercado es más competitivo, o sea, tengo más facilidad para llegar arriba. De hecho, en el reto, incluso depende del simulador y del año, pero han pasado ambas situaciones, donde hay un mercado donde el ganador pasa que los competidores no están y tiene la posibilidad de destacar mucho, pero también es más difícil porque el mercado es menos competitivo y por lo tanto la demanda que se activa respecto a la demanda potencial es más corta, ¿vale? Por lo tanto, es lo que entra por lo que sale. Sí que si nos pusiéramos súper detallosos podríamos encontrar alguna diferencia, pero en líneas generales podríamos decir que es igual de difícil que de fácil una situación que otra.
Ok, gracias.
También nos preguntan si se trabaja de equipo de forma individual. Como dijimos, pueden ustedes trabajar tanto individualmente como en equipo. Si trabajan en equipo, nos lo tienen que notificar al correo del reto CompanyGame. El viernes les mandaremos las claves y es cuando empieza ya la competencia.
Hi, Victor, again, if I understand well that because I'm playing alone, so I have to mention you that it's an individual or
No.
yes.
Only the ones that are going to play by teams have to send us an email saying in which teams. If you don't send an email, it means that you are going to participate individually.
Individually, all right. All right. And my email is registered, right? I don't have to send any email. You will just send us on Friday the login and password. That's all.
Exactly.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to share again the deadlines, okay, and the emails. Okay, remember these are the 3 deadlines. You will have this information in your platform, okay, in the Propius simulator, okay. And here you have the information if you want to send for the tips. Okay, so is there no more questions? I think we have it all. And I hope we can see all you in the next weeks, and I hope you have a very good experience with the simulator. Como les decía, espero que tengan una muy buena experiencia con el simulador y que sea también una buena competencia, ¿no? Sana competencia y que todos puedan tener una experiencia como la que viven los alumnos en el reto también. Así que estaremos en contacto. Thank you very much for everything. You have our email if you need to send us any questions, any doubt, what else. Así que un saludo y seguimos en contacto. Muchas gracias.
Saludos, gracias.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Muchas gracias.
Hasta luego, muchas gracias.